I will welcome all three speakers to come back up on stage. You will have the chance to talk together and to lead you and us through that conversation. We have Ingerid Salvesen, Norwegian journalist from the podcast Du Verden. Please, may you take over the stage.
Thank you. Yes, want to come up? Please join me. Hi, everyone, and happy almost Women's Day. What a start to the celebration of this day, to be together here tonight. Happy that you all came. We will open up for questions from all of you soon, so have that in mind while we start the conversation here. And very happy to have all of you here with us today. So powerful stories, it's almost hard to start the conversation, but we will. And I thought I should start with you, Azadeh. You mentioned in your talk how it's like to grow up in a family of that is very much shaped by the battle for human rights in Iran, and that you as an adult also became a part of that battle. And you mentioned that there was, for many years, you were trying to kind of subdue that activist in you. Why did you do that, and what changed? What made you go into activism?
Yeah, that's a good question, a difficult one. I think the why of it is that, at least in my family, it was, the story was not dissimilar to what my friends today said. In that, I think when you're fighting for things to get better, you just hope that things get better by the time your child is an adult, and that your child can move on to do better things and feel free. And I was in exile. Our exile began together with my mother, who I think was really hopeful that I can just move on, and I can move on, and that I can remember what happened, but that I just won't suffer as much as she thought I was. And so we had a lot of conversations in exile. We became best friends. We became each other's sisters. It was not just a daughter-mother relationship. And so I think she was bothered by the fact that I was living life vicariously through her and through my father. And so a lot of the push was really from my mother to just go on to explore. And I'm so thankful that happened, because the philosophy was, if they don't let you, go back to the country you come from, that you love, own the rest of the world if you can. And so I lived and I worked in places like Bangladesh, in India, in Argentina, in Mexico. I learned a lot from those places. And I think that's what, one of the things that I really feel saddened about when I think about today's youth in Iran and today's human rights advocates in Iran is that, like our friends mentioned, we're not only dealing with repression at home, but we are dealing with a situation of isolation abroad. They don't get visas. They don't get chances to study abroad. They don't, even if they do with the economic situation, they would just not be able to afford. And I had those opportunities, and I thought those journeys are going to let me away from Iran. But then in the end, it worked out like a circle, and I just took experiences from those moments, and I came back. I remember during the Green Movement in 2009 in Iran, I kept wanting to go back to Tehran, and my parents were very scared, and I was in Bangladesh in the villages working with women, and my father on the phone told me, just close your eyes and imagine you're in Iran. There are not that many differences between villages in Bangladesh and Iran. You can serve the women there the same way you can serve the women in Iran. And so they were trying to kind of keep me on my toes, and I think in the end it worked out for the best, because I had the opportunities that I wish really for millions of the youth today in Iran to have.
There is a strong history of women's movements in Iran, How would you describe the women activism that is going on in Iran today?
Yes, we have quite a strong history of activism among women's rights advocates and activists in Iran. I think the story of the women's rights struggle in Iran is quite a long one, so I don't know how to make it short. But I think of it like this: for every single thing that women have been deprived of in Iran, they have found a solution to challenge it. For every single, and it can be from, it doesn't have to be grand. I mean, we managed, in Iran, women have managed for years and years. It's not a new thing. Since almost a week or 2 or 3 after the hijab became mandatory in Iran, the veil became mandatory, they began to challenge the Iranian government by just even the centimeter by which their scarf was away from their hair. So really, the struggle began from something as small as that. And it's, to me, it's symbolic for everything else, for the women's rights lawyer struggle, for reforming the laws, for female athletes, for women artists, for ordinary women. So I think if you look at the Iranian society, you would really see Iranian women as quite present, which what I find really ironic is that for this visibility and for this presence, sometimes the Islamic Republic takes the credit for it, that it actually has allowed women to be that visible, which is, I think, a mistake on the side of the international community, because for every single one of those small openings that you see, if at all, is because we have currently women in prison fighting for that, having fought for those rights. We have older generation of human rights lawyers, women like my mother, Mehrangiz Kar, like the Nobel laureate Shirin Ebadi. We have right now Nasrin Sotoudeh and Narges Mohammadi in prison, all because they fought for human rights, and so many other women. And another thing about women's rights movement in Iran that I find really important is that because the struggle for women's rights is at the core of the way the Islamic Republic runs, like they have put restricting women, from restricting them to the right to their own body, to their rights, to the to everything. Women have become an integral part of fighting against repression. And so when I say women struggling for human rights, I truly mean it. It's not just women's rights. Women's voices and women's approaches, women's peaceful approaches for achieving human rights in Iran has become, in some ways, exemplary and model for other groups of advocates. I think we have come to a situation where, in Iran at least, I think, if we see any kind of change, any kind of social change, it will be done by women. I can promise you that.
It also links what you were talking about now, reminds me of what you were talking about also, Zaina, of how these women with the lipstick were challenging and kind of owning the space and in the streets in Raqqa or in Syria. And your work that you mentioned partly in your speech was also training citizen journalists, and among them also women. Can you talk a little bit about why was it important for you to train citizen journalists in Syria, and why was it important that women were among that group?
Well, related to the first part, well, when the uprising started, there were very few professional journalists who were daring to report what is happening. So many carpenters, university students start taking their mobile phones and reporting what is happening. At that time, I was privileged that I didn't only have the chance to finish my journalism studies, but also got a scholarship to do my master in Britain. I did some work as a journalist myself. Then I felt it's really very selfish to be a journalist in those circumstances. I decided that I want to pass over those things that I've learned to the others who are starting to become journalists. So the trainings started with those who have some experience or have been trying or filming or doing citizen journalism. And then after a couple of months, I realized that I'm only training men. And believe me, that was very difficult to be taken seriously by the local men, and I'm a local woman. By making them being convinced that despite being a woman, I know a little bit more than you. Everything was so challenging. However, I decided that I will invite all of those women who are interested in becoming citizen journalists, or at least just learning what is journalism, to the training. The first one I did was with Raed in Idlib, and I got 14 women on that first training, and plenty of children, because none of their husbands or families agreed to care for their children while they're doing a journalism training. So we actually, I had to ask one of them to volunteer and leave the training to babysit the kids, because I can't really do anything with 9 children jumping in my face. And then I started the training, and then I realized that only 2 of those women actually had a university degree. Most of them only had the 9th degree, because that's when you become 15 and usually are forced into marriage. Despite that fact, at the last day when we were finishing up with a practical story, 6 of them provided, in my opinion, very professional ones, and some stories that I wouldn't even been able to done myself because I don't have that access. One of the stories was done by a girl named Nasreen. She was like maybe 10 years younger than me and has 5 kids. And she wrote her story about the rise of domestic violence after the uprising. And she linked it with the frustration for men, for all the frustration which is being taken into the weaker member of the family. And I was very much shocked, because she managed to do an interview with the sheikh, with an imam. And in those conservative societies, mainly after the war, it is impossible to see a stranger man, and there is no public space for you to see that man. So I asked her, like, how could you manage to get his answers? And she said, well, I thought about it. I don't even have internet to interview him. I don't even know if he has a Skype account or whatever. So I wrote the questions for him on a piece of paper, and I sent it with my son to him at the mosque. And he read it, and he wrote it back and sent it to me. So like physical messenger. However, she managed the story, and this is just to echo what Azadeh has said. Being suppressed in so many terms is teaching you to be resilient, is teaching you to find your ways around that. And many of those women who I trained, at least 10 of them, are still living in Idlib and Aleppo, and they are still reporting and doing freelancing. And many of them are actually supporting their families from this career that 4 years ago they had no idea what it was, and they've never really thought that they would become journalists.
That's amazing news. What are the, what is the situation now for many journalists in Syria, and where you yourself had to leave?
Well, it's difficult to speak about one Syria now. There are different challenges that journalists are facing in the Kurdish-controlled, from those who are controlled by the regime, Iranians and Russians, from those who are controlled by Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups. I think the only one common thing among all those platforms is that all the independent journalists or voices or activists are being attacked by all. They're all being put in danger, and they're not really getting the support that they're supposed to be getting from the international freedom of expression organizations. When an independent journalist got killed, as Raed, he was fighting for 2 months to get funding for the radio, and he couldn't. And when he got killed, those donors issued these condolences. I was like, really? His partner, who was also in the picture with me, he started, after Raed was killed, he really started criticizing al-Nusra or al-Qaeda very loudly and clearly, and he had to go into hiding. He now made it to Turkey, and he called me yesterday saying, I'm jobless. I don't speak Turkish. I don't speak English. I just know how to be a defender and a brave person. What should I do? That wouldn't really support your family and feed your kids. So having a plan for those who are we encouraging to take those risks and defend freedom of expression, give them a plan B for them to keep alive, this is all not happening. And I think this is one of the challenges, even for those who survived physically but are still struggling on the mental level. There is extra one on women in all levels, even in the Kurdish areas, which are being perceived as the most equal ones. But a journalist that I interviewed there, she told me, I'm still being stereotyped. I'm not allowed to do but the women and children-related stories. In the regime-held areas, many women journalists are being harassed on checkpoints by the male soldiers who haven't maybe even seen a woman for years now. They might very, very likely get arrested, tortured, raped, and all the systematic torture that is being happening in Assad prisons. And in the opposition, they might be killing by accident, they might be killing as assassinated. They're limited, their movement is limited. their faces, they all use fake names because they can't really say who they are because it's chaotic, and again, there is no any kind of protection.
Yasmin, speaking of, echoing both of you of how oppression also teaches you how to deal with it. You created your own women delegation. We just heard. There has been empirical evidence that including women in peace negotiating processes will make it a higher chance of success. But why do you think that women are still not included?
Well, because first of all, they're not. I'm not really sure if like our presence will make the peace happening very soon, because women already now have their national peace and security agenda. They have their recommendations. They know exactly the roadmap towards peace. If you leave it to the choice of the delegations, of course they will not have women among them.
Why not?
Because they're more like followers, and like, I don't know, it's like, they're following more like orders that comes from leaders, I would say, but not as a woman. Women are really fighting to have their right to be part of this process. And on a local level, as I said, they're doing everything, but still excluded. And what is very disappointing is that they're excluded from the official track, which should be, something that the UN and the international community should be having the women on, talking about empowering women and having the women. How would you empower them if you're not negotiating with those delegations to have those women among them? We had only one woman, and she was nominated by her political party. And we were so happy having her, because after those rounds of peace talks, she was freely and openly speaking about the key points discussed, and knowing exactly who was not making the peace happening and who was not really helping the process to be happening. So we have now involvement, but indirectly, which is the Women Advisory Group, technical group. They advise the UN Special Envoy, but still, we don't want to be, we need to be on the front line. This is our right.
Sometimes it feels like the people are thinking we need to have the peace first and then we can deal with gender equality.
This is absolutely not right, because if you're speaking about peace building, how would you build a peace without having the woman involved? And now we are working on having an independent women delegation. And we're going to call for this until we have it, because, they could have came up with more like ideas, like what if the two delegations were giving extra seats for women, and if women are not there, then they should be empty, they should left empty. Or how could we influence on the process? So this is something that we really need to have support at.
And one reason the reason you're all here today is because you're part of this initiative that is also aimed to collaborate between different women activists in the region. And I wanted to discuss this a little bit with you. Like, what can be the benefits of collaborating or learning from each other? Are the country situations so specific that it's really hard to get any, advice from each other, or?
I think we share the same, let's say, obstacles. And this war somehow is like we're key actors too. Yeah, and like, for example, with Syrian women, it's the same peace process and peace things, negotiation. We learn from each other, we support each other, and we learn from the mistakes. So yes, and same thing with Iran.
On the personal level,
yeah.
Like, we just met yesterday, and we just had a very quick big hamburger dinner. And then we started really speaking about the virtual challenges, the actual challenges, our concerns about the kind of bullying that we would get after today's event. And obviously, everything was so much in common. Mm-hmm. We do face plenty of things that are in common because we're outspoken, we're women, we're from the region. Most of our communities are considered to be conservative. They don't really know how to handle that. This is on one level, having so much in common, more than many of the women who are in our region. Maybe I have much more in common with the women who are here. And secondly, this kind of support that you have people who understand you, who have gone through what you're going through, who also cannot suppress that damn activist inside you, and they're still having this battle despite what is going on. I think this is one essential hand that you wouldn't be able to clap without.
You're saying you're also part of the same conflict or your countries. Can it be difficult to collaborate when your families are in the no?
Well, I think the thing about being an activist or being brought up as an activist is that you think there's a solution to everything. So it's about finding the right approach, I think. Yes, in some cases, I think it can be dangerous if you have relatives in the country that can be harassed, or even, abroad, as you mentioned. I mean, you can get the online harassment these days is not a joke. And so I think, yes, the risks are there, the consequences can be there. But at the same time, I think there are ways to do it, to also break the taboo so others are not, as terrified to join, to hold each other's hand and to try to collaborate. We even face this domestically. I mean, in Iran, if you, in many cases, if you defend the rights of ethnic groups, you're immediately called a separatist. And so it's about finding the right ways among the communities, both I think domestically and internationally and regionally, and finding common grounds and common issues that are highlighting the similarities more than the differences. But another thing I wanted to point out is that, and I don't know if you find yourself in the same situation, but I do often, which is as we become community organizers and people who are sort of in the middle, in the center of a hub of helping other advocates become stronger and become more united. People look at us thinking we know it all, and so we are constantly training other people. We are constantly sharing our knowledge with others. But the truth is we need to learn ourselves all the time, and that's how we learn, and that's how we exchange knowledge, and that's how we exchange the experiences, the challenges, and I mean, even in tonight's speeches, I feel I have a few ideas that I will take back, to my organization, and I will discuss it with my team. And we can't always know everything, and we can't always teach to others, and so these are the opportunities. I think one of the biggest things is a knowledge share, and another thing is that oftentimes, at least in our part of the world, self-care and emotionally nourishing yourself is considered a bad thing, especially if you're an activist. You're supposed to only care about other people, and I think in settings like this, the friendships that emerge, the common understanding on a very human level that emerge helps to, to cool off sometimes, and to laugh together after you cry freely. You don't have to hold your tears, you can cry and laugh at the same time, and I think there is magic in that.
And you raised some very important points, which is how do you keep going? And some of you also mentioned this in your speech, how to keep your activism sustainable in a way, both emotionally but also financially. What are your strategies, if you want to share some of them with us tonight? I don't know, Yasmin. How do you keep going?
I mean, helping others makes me happy, makes me, eager to do more. And when you see things are happening, like for example, when we plan something together with the women, and when these messages, reach out to the people that we want really them to hear our voices. And when we feel like we're changing, we're making a change, this makes us really always, hungry to do more and more. And yes, we will continue, because it's also important that women should not be always seen as a volunteers, This is something that we should also consider, that they should be economically empowered in order to be independent and to have this power to sustain this, productivity. So I think this is very important. And what I've noticed is that protection programs, we are lacking protection programs for women from the 3 countries while exchanging. There is no long-term protection programs. This is really needed for women.
Is this a problem, that women are often looked upon as volunteers in their human rights work? Or?
It is usually, like, I don't know, but it's like when you see always that women are taking these even positions with international NGOs. They would give them this position, or the payment would be very little.
Because you're local, not because you're a woman.
And no, it's just in general, this is what we noticed, that they should also think about empowering them economically. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned something else in your speech, Azadeh, which I found interesting, how you said childhood and youth are the biggest threats to ideological kind of machines, what you said. How would you also mentioned now that you are kind of worried about the youth in Iran. Is there any examples of how they are still being a threat to the regime?
Sorry, what?
Are they still a threat to the regime in Iran?
Yes, I think I don't think it's just to the Iranian government. I think any state that tries to run ideologically has a challenge of dealing with children, mischievous children and youth. I think part of it is because, I think a few things, and it's my personal experiences, not really a deep study, but I think, happiness and being able to find any excuse to be happy. I remember from my childhood in Iran, and I was born during the Iran-Iraq war, and then, after, so it wasn't an easy time, Any excuse that you could find, we would find to go and dance in the streets. Anything. A football team, winning, a local, national, international, or, anything. For instance, in school, we had one, in high school, we had one male teacher, and we tortured this man so much. It was an all-girls school, and as soon as he would write on the board, it was a math class. As soon as he would turn back to write on the board, we would all take our lipsticks and put on lipsticks, and he would turn and he would be scared for his job. Because we were not allowed to have the lipsticks to begin with, but a male teacher with a group of high school students all with lipsticks, or so many of these kinds of things, and it's a challenge to manage. It's a question of managing happiness and allowing a little bit of happiness so that people don't end up in the streets and protesting and questioning your legitimacy, but at the same time managing it. And I think with children and with youth who are just so fearless, naturally so fearless, it's very difficult because you don't know when it's going to go out of your control. And another thing is, I think one of the strategies of these kinds of governments is to create a collective identity, collective political identity to the degree that they can. But by the time they can, so the brainwashing has to be so strong that it kind of, it has to surpass this natural tendency to be individuals, to smile, to play, to be a typical unruly teenager, and it's always a battle. I really see it like a battle, and at the same time, you have to show internationally that you take care of your youth, you take care of your children. So you need to have a theatrical element of that as well to the world to show that you're not the worst government in the world. So I think there is a lot of that happening. It's sort of a back and forth. It's a very, if you want to call it in a peaceful way, I think it's a very strange dance between the youth and the Iranian government. So.
We will soon open up for questions from the audience, so feel free to think what you want to ask. Speaking of this battle between the youth and the government, often there is, at least in the West, there seems to be this view at least if some of these countries are stable, that's more important than, for example, criticizing them for not giving human rights to their population or to women. How would you define stability for your countries or societies? Like, do you think that these countries are stable today in a good way? Well, but Iran, for example, which is...
Yeah. I've had to think about this question a lot as Iran comes on and off of the international stage. Sometimes it's a good guy, sometimes it's a bad guy. And you have to constantly ask yourself where you stand as a human rights advocate. This is what I have decided for myself. I think no matter what happens in Iran, I'm going to be a pain in the neck of this government or the next government, because I think we have many years to fix our problems. And I personally believe in gradual change. But no matter what happens, I think that human rights has to be a constant. There are a lot of variables. Question of, whether the world is at peace with Iran, whether Iran is at a risk of being at another war, whether sanctions are going to cripple the economy, on and on, internationally. But I think where I stand is, no matter what, I have to defend the rights of the people to be able to voice their opinions and to voice their demands. And I cannot stop and all the time adjust myself to the next international phase that's going to arrive, because I think that just would mean that I'm risking losing my voice to the changes of political climate, and also I'm risking compromising over political matters for human rights. And no matter how politicized human rights as a subject matter has become in the world, I choose to believe that it stands much beyond politics, and that for myself, I define the role of always defending human rights. We have groups, sometimes of advocates in today's Iran that say because Iran is at a risk of a war or because of international sanctions, or the sanctions against Iran, and so on, we have to stay quiet about the situation that's happening on the ground. I strongly disagree. I don't think talking about what's happening on the ground is an invitation for a war. I think talking about what's happening on the ground is simply talking about what's happening on the ground and elevating the voices of grassroots advocates who are risking their lives every day. And they have been risking their lives before this situation of the international climate, liking Iran or disliking Iran, and they're going to continue. So I think we have to let them lead the way. And letting them lead the way, in my opinion, is consistency and continuity in our narrative. So that's where I choose to stand.
I see you both are nodding. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, related to the stability, for me, as I've seen it in the last couple of years, for Europe, stability in Syria is having no refugees coming from Syria to your country, whether they're actually being drowned in the Mediterranean, kept in the neighboring countries, or killed inside Syria. So that is the stability that I've seen, whether in the events where the politicians are saying, or even like in many of the media outlets that I could read. For me, it is really scary that many are now thinking that the war has ended in Syria and it is time to wash Assad and keep the relationships, putting Syria back on the Arab League, like as if nothing has happened, but there is something that happened and you can't really run away from it. Yesterday, 2 days ago, I had an event with the FCO, the British Foreign Ministry, and they were speaking about Syria and that we don't think about opening an embassy or whatever. And I was like, but you know, you have a very unique, high-profile British person who is still in Syria, and like Shamima, she also went to Syria. She also got married to a war criminal who is being recognized as a war criminal. She is advocating for that war criminal, and she is the first lady. So while the British government is stripping off like this brides of ISIS from their nationalities, no one is speaking about her because she's good-looking, she's tall, she's British educated. Sadly, many of the European countries are still dealing with Syria the same way. We know many of those who are from the security forces, like the head of the air forces, even traveled freely to Italy. Many of them are coming for shopping for here because they have sanctions to do things online. While the regular Syrian, or someone like me who's advocator, who's known, who's working for an international organization, we always get stripped from the queues, put on the side, interrogated. This system is really very contradicting for me. Like, I don't really understand it. To conclude, I think there is not going to be any kind of stability, neither in Syria or anywhere in the region, without justice, without accountability, without some kind of solutions for all those refugees who many of them would really come back when they know that they're not going to be arrested on the ways, their house are going to be returned to them after being stripped out of them or destroyed. So you can get rid of us by allowing us to go back.
Yeah, with us, I mean, with Yemen, nobody is really bothered by the war in Yemen because we're still seen, we're not categorized as a refugees. We're more like hidden guests. I would not say few doors are open for Yemenis. Not really. Maybe when you reach to Europe, then you're able to seek asylum. But for Yemenis, they, like when the war started, they went out, they stayed for like 1 year, 2 years, and then they had to go back and face death because they have no other option. So nobody's bothered by the Yemeni war. We're not sending out refugees. So things are fine with them. It will continue.
So you have stability.
Yeah. No.
It depends how you define it, I guess. And for who is also like stability for who, right? Not necessarily for the people in Yemen.
Warlords.
Is there anyone who wants to ask some questions? There's one on the front row.
Thank you all.
I think you will actually have a mic if you want one.
Thank you to all three of you for everything that you're doing and how extraordinary even the way you told your stories has been tonight. Yasmin, I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit more about the women's delegation. How have you gone about identifying who would participate? You mentioned that there's a very clear and strong sense of what is needed. If they would just be asked, so I'm not asking you to go through all of it, but could you maybe share some of the things that this delegation is advocating for? I'd just like to hear a little bit more about it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so we went to Geneva last time. It was before Stockholm. So at that time, it was the Peace Track Initiative only delegation, which I was leading. And the thing is that we were not allowed to be in the official venue for the talks, but we were able to conduct sideline meetings with, with all international actors and ambassadors. We were free to convey the messages of the Yemeni women who were in the ground because before that we did some consultations with Yemeni women in which we had groups called peace circles. We discussed thematic areas and solutions, and then we had to go to Geneva to meet with all the actors and to share with them these messages and and consultations. So at that time there, we were trying to support the Women Advisory Group to the UN Special Envoy, because they didn't really have the freedom that we had, to go and talk. They were a little bit protected. So it was this support to them. It was also our role to call for our right to be at this peace negotiation table. Afterwards, when we came back, I'm a co-founder of Women's Solidarity Network. It's a network that has 300 women on board. we are trying to do like a small election by calling the women who are interested to be among this delegation, which could start from 8 to 16 women. And then by sharing their bios or CV or their will to be among this delegation, we will do this election by giving all the 300 women the right to vote. And then maybe this could be somehow a very strategic approach to have women representation. Yes, and we're waiting for this coming peace talks. We will have them, and we really hope to have the support of all the internationals to make this happening soon. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any other questions? There's one on the side here.
Hi there. I'm Anette Groth. I'm a foreign news journalist here in Norway. Been abroad a lot, though, to some of your countries. But I wanted to ask Zaina, because I was on the other side when you and the citizen journalists did all your footage. It all came to Reuters and all the big agencies, and they sent it out, and it was so important. And I admired all those people who went out there in dangerous conditions, and it was such an important corrective to the government information coming out. So I just wanted to say that, how important it was for us to try and give a correct picture of what was going on in Syria. But you were talking about Assad and Asma Assad and the British educated people, and I just want to ask you, can you see any future for Syria that you could accept with Bashar al-Assad still as the president?
Certainly no. He is a war criminal. I can't see any future of Syria unless he is in the ICC being really in a trial for committing all these crimes. At least him as a person, if we're not speaking about all those groups who were working with him, and certainly from the other side, from the rebel side, whoever is committing crime. I think that justice is the main reason, is the main thing that would allow any of us to go back. Otherwise, it's going to be staying as it is. Not to mention that I think Assad himself is not in control of Syria anymore. He's really in control of Russia and Iran, and we're seeing plenty of footage where he's being guided to stand behind Putin, or he's not being allowed to get in next to him while they are on the Syrian lands. So for me, at least for me, my family, and all of those who I know who started the uprising in 2011, as long as he is in power, that means Syria is not safe for any of us to go back. It's not going to be stable at any time soon, because obviously there is no will to put him on trial.
But can you envisage what justice would be?
Taking criminals into court?
All of them?
Or? I don't think there is an or.
Thank you. Any more questions? We have time for some more. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dr. Hala Abdul Wahab. I'm from the Kingdom of Bahrain. I'd first like to thank all of you for sharing your very touching experiences with us. It does make a high difference for us if we get to see something from the eye of the people who are actually there, rather than rely on the media and whatever is brought to us. When I first came across the seminar title, Women's Voices Changing the Middle East, I was very intrigued to know what could be said and what could be shared, being a Middle Eastern woman myself. And I must tell you that you have exceeded any expectations that I had, and that I really admire, and I'm in awe of all your activities and your strength and resilience, and you are definitely role models. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Comments are also welcome, especially praise. Any other questions? We still have time for a few more. No? No questions? Yes, one question. Let's go. Do you want to give her a mic?
Zaina, not to put you on the spot, but I just love so much of what you're saying, and I'm just going to have to ask you again. But there was a bit of what you were discussing in terms of Asma, and also the way that there's a bit of a double standard in how folks are being treated, and what does that really signify. What are a few, 2 to 3, if you will, like advocacy items that you would be pushing for with some countries in the West that purport to care about human rights issues, yet are sort of enforcing these types of double standards and things like that? I just would be curious to know what sort of advocacy positions you're pushing for, or any of your colleagues are.
I think the first one, which is not really very much related to Europe, but the first one would be the Syrian detainees, and even of those kidnapped. Now, as ISIS is decreasing from Syria, for example, no one is really asking where are those who are kidnapped by ISIS, and the Syrian detainees who are thousands, hundreds of thousands, no one is really asking about them, despite the fact that Caesar pictures and all of those proofs has been really published, exhibited, and spread all over Europe. But those detainees are very much neglected, and we just heard one of hundreds of thousands of stories. None of the Syrian people that I know but have someone who is in prison, and they don't know whether they're killed or not. Like, even the ability to put a conclusion to the story that they have been killed or have a certificate or a tomb, those are all not feasible. So I think for me, the first priority, I think, pressuring Assad, pressuring whoever have force on Assad, like Russia, whatever, to at least, if you don't want to get the detainees out, at least tell their families, their beloved ones, whether they're dead or alive, where they are. Like, just fighting to know this fighting to know whether your son is dead is not really a great deal of information, but this is very essential, and it will make an ending for a very difficult stories. The second thing, I think, especially now, I think the UK has declared that this year is freedom of expression, and I was like, you are encouraging people to take this amount of risk to defend freedom of expression and to be independent. What would you do if they got in risk? And I just mentioned Raed and Ahmad and plenty of others. Well, they're certainly not going to be giving them any visas, because Syrians' visas to the UK, even those who are living in Europe, are declined visas into the UK, because we're not sure that you're going to go back. You reach the heaven, so it's impossible to leave. No insurance if they got killed, shot, nothing for their families if they got arrested. Even if they immigrated, there is no way that they can arrange for internship, for giving them chances to be able to build themselves. So you're encouraging for human rights, at least protect those who are putting their lives on risk to defend those human rights. You want to defend freedom of expression, protect those who are defending freedom of expression. Or at least do not humiliate them, do not confiscate their passports, do not put them on the checkpoints, do not ban them from traveling into your countries. So detainees, human rights offenders, and a special emphasis on those women, because, as we all spoke about, they do have extra difficulties that they're facing because they're women and they need extra support.
Some messages to the whole international community, including Norway there. I guess, is there any other things that you would like to add towards the end? For example, what can the international community do, or even Norway, since we are in Norway here now, to support the kind of work that you guys are doing better?
You want to start?
Yeah, well, I think I tried to highlight it in my speech. I don't know what can be done, but I think that there needs to be more and more work done on political prisoners, and I come from Iran. Iran is why my heart beats, but this is really for like the region and the world. And I think if you create a country, it will be a country of political prisoners. So think about that country and care for it and their families and their communities. And my request to all of us, including myself that sometimes falls for this, don't think of all these very brave human beings and their families as poster children and as victims. There is agency in there, there is choice in there, there is courage in all of those stories. So please, when you help to raise awareness about the situation, think of them as your own people. and not people or families and individuals in some far place in the world where, you know, they are poor and they have nothing and you know, they're sad. I promise you we are happy when we're allowed to, and even when we're not allowed to. So I think that please don't forget the political prisoners and their families, and don't take away our agency while you fight for our rights.
Do you want to add something?
I think the supports, whether mental, advocating, raising awareness, sadly, after 8 years of the Syrian conflict, we still need to say that. At the beginning, it was ISIS against Assad, and now it's like everything is stable. There is always those kind of things which tell you that Syria is out of the map. It is not. And now you have plenty of Syrians that are very close to you. Instead of speaking about Syrians, speak with Syrians. It is very easy. Ask them what they want you to do. It's also not that difficult. And just, I think, as they said, put faces and stories. They didn't come to steal your money or taxes. They really came because they couldn't handle it more, and they might be able to go back if your government and the other governments has pressured for some kind of justice and actual stability to be happening in their countries.
Jasmine?
Yeah, from my side, I think I said it all, but maybe to have more women to the Norway and here, empower them by creating spaces for them, by making their voices strong, and also shift on the humanitarian aid into development. It's good to combine development with the humanitarian aid, because Yemenis have enough resources, but they need really to sustain this by, you know, thinking about development, which will provide them with an income rather than joining fighters and others. So this could be one great approach. And for the women, you know, just more protection programs, more, you know, spaces. Yes, that's all.
Hopefully one such space was created here tonight.
Yes.
Thanks to all of you for coming. You're the one who's creating this space together with us. Thank you to everyone who came tonight. And I will give Ingvild the last word. But happy Women's Day tomorrow. Yeah, I'll leave it to you.
No. You said thank you. You said happy Women's Day. I'd like to thank the Oslo Women's Rights Initiative and Miriam and Asma especially for bringing all these fantastic women here. And we won't let you leave without giving you this. These are the Nobel Peace Prize chocolates. I'm not able to give you the ones in gold, unfortunately, but these are quite good, actually. And you really deserve them. And thank you for giving us, and you have one too. It's been an excellent warm-up for Women's Day tomorrow, and I just want to inform you that at the Nobel Peace Center we will rally under the slogan Stop Sexual Violence in War and Conflict, as it is related to this year's Nobel Peace Prize. So if you are in Oslo tomorrow, please come and join us, and have a lovely evening. Thank you. Thank you.